guys, it's Kevin again. We're here to talk about, finally, is the last 3 episodes of The Boys Season 4. And look, I'll just say right off the bat, I don't really know what happened, if I am honest. I meant to film this video like forever ago. I watched the last 3 episodes like 3 weeks ago or so, and I was going to do it actually like a week ago, and then for some reason my webcam just kind of stopped working, so I couldn't really do that. I just wasn't able to find the right time to do this video, so I do apologize for the fact that this is a later video than I was expecting it to be. I really did go into this season and House of the Dragon and The Acolyte hoping that I would review all episodes individually, but it just didn't really end up materializing. But even though I didn't end up doing that, I still want to go ahead and just talk about the rest of the season. I'm going to do this with The Boys, I'm going to do it with House of the Dragon, and then Acolyte I have separate plans with, considering that was just canceled. I have a separate video planned for that I will end up doing in the near future, but regardless, let's just get into it. If you recall, The Boys Season 4, up to this point, I've really been enjoying. It's definitely been a season that's been a little bit more divisive than the previous 3. I think there's just been a lot of divide on just the sheer amount of storylines and characters and how it's all really going to connect in the end. And look, I'm not saying that I haven't been concerned about that. I have expressed my concerns when it comes to, I don't really know if I like how this storyline is going, I don't really see the point of this. But I've been hopeful that they were able to bring everything together. And I will say this about these last 3 episodes is that I do think overall this season is still really good. I'm still a really big fan of this season overall, but there is no doubt in my mind this is for sure the weakest season of The Boys to date, and there's quite a few reasons for that, but either way, we're just going to go ahead and talk about these 3 episodes. Now, I will say this is not going to be nearly as in-depth as the individual reviews were, just because I don't want this video to be like 2.5 hours long. My review for the first 3 episodes ended up being way longer than anticipated, and I just don't want to do that again, just because 1, it's hell to edit, 2, I just want to be able to finally get this video done. It's taken as long as it is. I don't want to drag this out, so without further ado, let's just go ahead and talk about episode 6. Now, when discussing The Boys Season 4, episode 6, I think it's an episode that there's, one, kind of like episode 4, where there's one thing that kind of overshadows everything else. And this has been the case a lot this season, but more than most, I think this episode, there's just one particular plot line that I think is going to be remembered, and not necessarily in a very fond way. It's been probably the most controversial element of this entire season, and I mean, I guess I'll just get it right out of the way. The whole Huey storyline this episode, look, I think that this is what The Boys does do, stuff like this, where you have characters, getting in these really gross and sexual situations, and I think on paper, the idea of Huey masquerading as Web Weaver, I think is a really funny idea. Him going to this party that turns out, him trying to meet with Tech Knight to try to take him down, and it ends up being this front, basically, for, like, this weird, underground, sexual organization of sorts that, Ashley's also part of. I think that's a really funny idea, and, seeing him get involved in these situations, I think could have been really funny. But I think timing is everything when it comes to comedy, and I just don't think, coming off the heels of Huey having this whole, really dramatic episode with his father and him having to put him down and him trying to grieve, I just don't think this was the right time to have Huey go through a situation like this, because, yes, obviously there is the fact that he is repeatedly sexually assaulted, and, there's been a lot of debate about how they executed it, and I think on one hand, yes, it was definitely coming from a comedic place. I don't think Huey getting sexually assaulted was a joke. I think it was more so just the really gross shit that Web Weaver and Ashley were, and Tech Knight were into. I think that's more so the joke, but I think it more so is just the fact of who it was, the fact that it was Huey and he had this really emotional episode. I kind of just wanted to see him grieve. I wanted to see them focus on him trying to recover from his dad dying. What does this do to him? You know, he's kind of felt distant from the boys all season because he's been so squarely focused on, you know, trying to figure out what to do about his mother and then trying to help his father. And I just wanted to see them focus on that a bit. And I think instead, kind of shifting to Huey doing this mission to take down Tech Knights, it just didn't really work as well for me. And I also think I would have enjoyed it a lot more if it didn't take up such a heavy portion of this episode. I feel like in an earlier season of The Boys, this would have been like a 5-minute scene at most, but this takes up a good, like, I don't want to say 50% of the episode, but at least a good like 30 or 40% is, you know, Huey in this underground thing and Tech Knight ultimately, repeatedly sexually assaulting him and things like that. Them not realizing it's Web Weaver. Obviously, that's the irony of it all. But I just think after a while, it just started to get a bit tired. Were there moments that I laughed? Sure. When Huey was like forced to shit and things like that, I thought that was kind of funny. I thought I thought that the recurring gag of him not being able to figure out the safe word to get out of that situation and then ultimately figures it out at the end, I thought, you know, what it ended up being, I thought that was kind of funny. But overall, I mean, I definitely think it is a perfect example of The Boys just maybe doing a little bit too much when it comes to the satire. I kind of hinted at this in episode 2, but I am fine with these really over-the-top and shock moments if it doesn't become constant. And it feels like this season they're just kind of doubling down on it too much, and this is easily like the worst example of it I have seen. Yes, I haven't seen an example in The Boys where they have done something like this and it has felt completely unnecessary to me. And I'm not going to say that this didn't lack a purpose, because it did. They were trying to get information out of Tech Knights and, you know, trying to see what involvement he had, you know, with Homelander and things like that, and what they can really do to, try to get that information out of him. There definitely was a purpose there, but it felt like so much of it was focused more on just these really gross out situations, and that just didn't really end up doing for me. It was just kind of weird to have Ashley here too, when all season long we've kind of been giving her like sort of this redemption arc of sorts. We're trying to portray her in a more heroic direction. It didn't really make sense to have her present in this scene. Yes, we know she's into like a lot of like bondage and things like that, so I guess that works, but like, I don't know, just having her present here, it just didn't really work for me, and I don't really think they did a great job with that. So yeah, I mean, my overall thoughts that I do think there are parts that were funny, but one, I think it just went on way too long. Two, I don't think it was the right timing. I would have really liked to see Huey focus on grieving, and even having Daphne leave like right at the beginning of this episode. It's like, why did we spend all this time on her if we're just gonna have her leave by the end of the season? I really thought that the rest of the season was gonna be Huey trying to, develop this life with his mother that he was never able to have, and them sort of reconnecting in that way. I thought that's what a lot of this season was gonna focus on, but it ultimately didn't, and it's just another one of those things that just didn't really end in a very satisfying manner, and I found myself very underwhelmed by that. So yeah, I don't think they did a great job with that. There's also the fact that Tech Knight as a character just didn't really end up working for me in this episode. I feel like they, in Gen V, he was kind of presented as like this very like kind of slanderous reporter who was trying to do what he can to like antagonize Marie, antagonize other Godolkin students, and really try to turn them against each other, and that worked for me. Him being this like over-the-top, overly racist, almost cartoon character, it just didn't really end up working this time around. It just felt like they knew that they were going to kill him off, so they wanted to show him at his absolute worst, and it did come from some funny moments, like the moment where they're all interrogating him, and the thing that gets him to finally relent and reveal to them, like, what's happening with Homelander and Sage, and them building these internment camps, is them trying to donate $1,000 to Black Lives Matter. I thought that was all really funny. But overall, I just thought the way that they portrayed his character, it just felt not too dissimilar from how they portrayed other characters in this show, and it's just starting to get a little bit too much. Like, not every soup has to be this, like, overly racist character. We can have characters that have a little bit more shades of gray to them, and I feel like Tech Knight is just one that they kind of just wasted here. If they were going to make him this way, I think they should have spent a little bit more time on him, because I didn't expect him to die the way he did. I didn't expect him to have this whole sort of moment happen with Huey. I just wasn't a huge fan of the way they portrayed his character here, and I think they could have done it just a little bit better. I think just the nuance when it comes to his character just wasn't really there, and so I didn't really care either way how things ended up going. But I just think, again, that it just felt a little bit more throwaway than I was expecting. Really the first time in The Boys where they've done something really wild and crazy, and I just wasn't totally into it. So again, I honestly think that the controversy is completely warranted. Also, the fact that Eric Kripke views this all in like a very comedic light, and he doesn't understand why others would be uncomfortable by it. I get it that like he wrote the scene as comedic, but I think it's very important to note that like not everyone is going to respond to things in the same way, and I get it that he might have been taken aback by that, but I think there was a better way to phrase it, saying like, I didn't see it that way, but I can understand why others would have, and we tried to be as sensitive as we could, because I think they did. Towards the end, we do get a sense of Huey's perspective and just how violated he was and how uncomfortable he felt with everything that happened, and I think they did a good job with that. I just thought his response was just really weird overall, but yeah, honestly, not a ton more to say regarding this part of the episode, but it's been such a heavy debates that I feel like it's impossible to discuss this episode without talking about it. I've seen a lot of people say it's kind of what has turned them off from The Boys, and I completely get that. Like, if you were like deeply offended by this scene and it kind of made you not as into the rest of the season, I can understand that for sure, because it definitely is like a very uncomfortable sequence the way it was done. For me, it's more so just the timing of it all. That's really what doesn't work for me. I think that this could have worked really well if Huey wasn't going through all this emotional turmoil already with his father, and then just having him immediately thrusted into this situation. It just didn't really end up working for me. So it really is the first time in The Boys where they've done something really outrageous, and I just felt that honestly they maybe just went a little bit too far with it. Okay, so now that I've talked about all the stuff concerning Huey, because like I said, that's such a major part of this episode, let's talk about the things that I did really like about this episode. The party overall that ends up going down, I thought was really well done. Basically, there's this party that's happening that Tech Knight is hosting in his mansion. We get some really good moments here. Newman is like is trying to kind of play double agent at this point, and she's starting to see through Homelander a bit, the way that he is controlling her, the way that he kind of has her on this leash of sorts. You see her starting to crack, and I thought all of that was really well done. I continue to love what they do with A-Train in this episode, with MM having this full-on panic attack and A-Train coming to save him, and him now not only saving MM, but then also having this moment with this kid who's looking at him like he's heroic. He's finally getting to be the hero he's always wanted to, and it's just such a satisfying moment for that character. I really love what they've been doing with him. I think Brandon T. Jackson has been just on fire this entire season, and this is easily like one of the most heartfelt moments I think we've ever had in the show, because A-Train has always seen himself as this hero who saves people and who is taken seriously, but he's never really done anything that is worthy of being such, and finally seeing him getting that recognition and, genuine love from this kid who is inspired by him, you can just see this sudden face of accomplishment, and just how delighted A-Train is to see that now he finally is being taken seriously, because he actually has done the work to become a hero, and I think all of that has been really great this season, so I continue to really like what they're doing with him. When it comes to everything they do with Firecracker as well in this episode, I think Firecracker was really well written in the last 3 episodes of this show in particular. I think they really gave her some great stuff. She had that conversation with Sage in episode 5 where Sage was kind of talking about what she needed to do to kind of, what she really needed to do if she wanted to get close to Homelander, and, her going to Annie and Annie apologizing to her and admitting what she did, but also kind of getting Firecracker to recognize that she isn't a great person either, and that if she really wants to fight for her cause, she's going to have to do something, and her deciding to go to Homelander not as someone who is going to try to impress him in as a lover, but as a mother, and she's starting to lactate, and you can see that this actually gets his attention. She finally has this control over him. She is feeling subservient to him by the end of this episode, and I thought they did some really great work with her in this episode. I really like the way they are diving deeper into what she really wants, because all Firecracker really wants is this sense of success. She wants to be the voice of the people. She wants to be someone that has this platform, and this was her way of getting further into that and making sure that she was able to have that influence in the way that she does. And now the way she has this influence over Homelander, I thought all of that was really well done here. And then, of course, the other big thing in this episode is Butcher and Joe. We finally start to see Joe and him, pushing Butcher further when it comes to Samir. And by the end of this episode, Butcher realizes that Joe... basically, it finally confirms what we've all suspected, that Joe is, in fact, not real. He was at one point, but he did die a long time ago, and Butcher is now fantasizing him as basically the worst version of himself. Anytime the Butcher is giving into his darkest temptations, it is in the form of Joe, and anytime he is trying to be a little bit more vulnerable and human, that is when Becca appears. And look, here are my thoughts on this. This was the most obvious twist in the world. The second that the theory came up, it was definitely one that I was not able to let go of. It reminds me a lot of a Westworld season 1. If you haven't seen Westworld season 1, there's 2 theories going on that everyone thought was pretty obvious, but the show took forever to reveal. But at least with that, I think that those reveals were still really satisfying, and they did a really good job at laying everything out. This, to me, just felt kind of unnecessary. I don't think they needed to drag this out. I honestly think they could have confirmed right from the start that Joe was actually a hallucination. I don't know why you needed to have all these episodes kind of trying to mask the fact that he might be, when by the end it's incredibly obvious that that's the direction they were going in. So I don't know, I'm of two minds about it, where I like the fact that we have Jeffrey Dean Morgan on the show. I think he's done some really great work. But I just feel like when it comes to Kessler as a character, it just was really obvious as the episodes went on that he wasn't real, that he wasn't actually there. And I just feel like they could have spent a lot less time on the, on questioning, is he real, than just outright saying it's, from the beginning. And I think it would have made for just a little bit more interesting of a story overall. But for the most part, I still really did enjoy this episode. I think there's still a lot to really like about this one. Some really good character building moments, some really funny moments at the party and the different things that go down and the different people that everybody is encountering. You also get a little more sense of Homelander's plan this episode, of him trying to get deeper into the political field and try and do what he can to stop Singer from enacting this law to restrict soups. You can see how Homelander is continuing to just wrap around everyone's finger and the different causes he's supporting, and how even though he's supporting all these terrible causes, he's doing whatever he can to weasel his way into what he deems as the right people to, get into his corner so he can make sure that things go the way he wants to. I think all of that was really well done. done. What they did with Firecracker in this episode, I really was impressed by. Newman, I thought, had some really great moments. A-Train, I think, stealing the show in this episode. Just in general, I think this was still a really strong episode. It definitely, if I had to say right now, I think it is the weakest of the episodes we have had of The Boys so far. Just because I think there are just some things that went on a little bit too long. Everything with Huey and things like that, I just think it got a very repetitive and very stale by the end. Tech Knight, I think they honestly kind of wasted as a character. And there's just some storylines like with Butcher and Kessler that just ended up coming across as far more predictable than they really should have. But I still really did enjoy this episode. There still was a lot to like about it. So I am going to give this episode of The Boys, Season 4, Episode 6, Dirty Business, a B. So, for the second video in a row now that I'm doing, you're gonna notice once again that the aspect ratio is about to change. Just like I said in my Big Brother video, this was not something that I was aware that happened until I had finished, began editing this video. There really wasn't anything I could do about it. Anytime I tried to crop it, it just looked kind of weird. So we're just gonna have to live with it. So if you see the black bars and things like that, that is why. I figured I'd just come in, because if I didn't and it just like went right to that video, it would just feel kind of weird and awkward. So either way, like I said, not much I can do about it, but enjoy the rest of the video. Okay, so it's clearly like many days later, as you can see, and I do apologize for that. I meant to do the entirety of that video when I initially filmed it, but it got too late, and then the camera also like needed to charge. This is not the only video I'm saying this in. So yeah, we're gonna go ahead and continue this now, talking about Season 4, Episode 7, The Insider. And while Episode 6, I feel like was an episode that wasn't necessarily a letdown, but I think just didn't really do a great job of like fitting into the season. Kind of felt like it could have been like, it didn't need to be its own episode. This one is, I think, a better example of what this season has done really well. I really enjoyed this episode a lot. I think there's a lot of things that they do really well here. Big things to talk about right off the bat. Basically, the main storyline in this episode, where it's all about, again, trying to uncover the deeper conspiracy of what's going on here. What are, the boys really facing? They know this virus is out. They know the virus is out there. Butcher makes them aware that he is able to, have the virus become a lot more lethal. It could, ensue this big pandemic of sorts in terms of soups. But he is decidedly against it. And so now that we aren't going to, focus on the virus as much, now we really need to focus more on what we're really facing. And this is when they start to become a lot more aware of this whole sort of plot of what the soups are going to do in an effort to make sure that Singer's Law is not enacted in any way. And basically what they want to do is assassinate Singer. They're going to try to kill him on January 6th, which, no, it's not exactly subtle, but again, I've said this before, The Boys has never been a subtle show, so like, I don't necessarily have a problem with that, and I honestly think it makes a lot of sense. If you're going to do, like, a political story, I feel like you gotta lean fully into it, and this season definitely is no exception in that regard. They and this season definitely did just that, so I don't really have any issue with that being the case. I know some people said that they thought that was a one step too far, but I honestly don't have too many issues with them deciding to do a January 6th thing. I feel like it was only a matter of time before they were going to. So they're trying to figure out what to really do about this, but we're also following, just like the rest of the season, different storylines in this episode. The best of which, for me, actually comes from MM in this episode. I really like what they ended up doing with him here, because after the events of episode 6, where he's had this panic attack, he's thinking about maybe not wanting to be in The Boys anymore. He was really embarrassed, but also just feels like maybe maybe for his health and for his family, it's just not really a great idea for him to remain within the boys. And basically, he decides that he's going to pass the baton to Butcher. Butcher's now back in charge of the boys, and this leads him and A-Train to have this really good conversation that I thought was easily one of the best parts, not just of this season, but I think of the entire show, where he talks about just how he finally felt like a hero. He finally felt great for the first time in his life. It's a really good contrast to someone like A-Train who, prior to this season has mainly just focused on trying to run away from his problems and ignore them and kind of just focus on, what he believes and not his actual reality, versus MM, who has always been this guy that's been really noble, always cared for his family, always cared about his causes, but he's kind of in conflict with that because his causes are directly impacting his family, and he feels like this walking contradiction of sorts, where on one hand, he's trying to bring down the violence that is hurting his family, but on the other hand, he is killing them in very violent and deadly ways. And I thought this scene between MM and A-Train might just be one of my favorites of the entire show. I think it perfectly underlines just the real message of this show, one of the biggest themes of this show, which is all about the idea of self-identity and corruption and not letting, not giving into your worst temptations. And MM, I've said it before, he's one of the most human characters on this show. And I think this scene just perfectly showcases that, but also the relationship between A-Train and MM. This is really when I feel like it comes full circle. You can really see that MM has made the significant change within A-Train, and it really is this scene that just perfectly illustrates that. So I thought that whole scene was incredible. I love the way all of that was done, and MM ultimately being the one to save the boys from almost complete annihilation, which we'll talk about, but just really great moments with MM. I really have enjoyed his arc, even if I've thought that maybe they should have focused on Janine and his wife and his ex-wife a little bit more. Maybe they could have done a better job at diving into those things. I really enjoyed what they did with him in this episode, and I thought that it made up for some of the lack of that storyline we've seen throughout this season. I thought that it was some of the strongest stuff within this episode. And then MM eventually, calling in his family and saying that he's going to be there and, telling them that, he wants to get back, but he's got to finish out this mission, and ultimately ends up rejoining the boys and, accepting his role as leader. Just some really great stuff with him this episode. I really like all the work they did with MM here. I feel like his storyline has been one of the most consistent of this season, and while maybe I don't think they focused on it as much as I was hoping for, I think they really did make up for that with this episode. I think they really did make up for that when it comes to this episode. When it comes to Butcher in this episode, he, like I said, he's really trying to rid himself of these more darker urges. He's trying to do what he can to focus on, doing things for the right reasons and, making sure that Samir is just there to take out Homelander and not Newman or any other soups. And you can see that Kessler is really trying to taunt him at this point. He is doing whatever he can to try to fully gain access to Butcher. There's this great scene where he kind of talks about how, despite the fact that he, his good side is Becca also, we find out, is someone that Butcher cheated on, while they were married. And I've heard many say that this kind of feels like it came out of nowhere. This doesn't really feel like something that Butcher would do. But remember, Butcher has this really dark past. He's done a lot of things that really do haunted him. There are a lot of things that he has done that he's very regretful of. I think it is very believable to think that he would end up doing something like this just because of the fact that he was in such a low point in his life and kind of just was doing whatever he can to repress all of the anger, all the resentment he was feeling. I think it makes sense why he was doing that. Obviously, it doesn't make it right, but I think it honestly enriches his character. It shows yet another thing to add on to the many grievances that Butcher has committed and the things that he's dealing with internally. I think this was just a really great moment, so I really enjoyed the way that whole conversation ended up playing out. What they do with Huey in this episode is not too much. He mainly is trying to get Newman to maybe back off and trying to, you can see, get back into her good graces. And what I like about this is that it shows that despite the fact that she has done all this shit, their friendship was very much real. It very much did mean something to him. They had this genuine connection. Remember, for months, the two of them were really close, and he is trying to do what he can to generally, get her to remember that. And it seems like it's going to work, but it doesn't really end up going through in this episode. She still isn't budging. She still isn't willing to step down from, the Seven and things like that and stop working with Homelander, but maybe later it's gonna work. We'll talk about that, obviously, but I thought there was some really great moments there. So a lot of good storylines for the boys in this episode. Annie as well has some really great stuff here. There's that moment between her and her mom where basically her mom, she's trying to get her mom to go into hiding. She's letting her know it's not safe, but we find out that her mom has been impacted by all the things that have come out about Annie's abortion. It's made her, get kicked out of her church group and things like that. And this is yet another storyline that I just wish the show was diving a little bit deeper into. I think that the Annie stuff has been really great this season, but this is a storyline that, like I said, has just felt a little bit rushed to me, and I think that this is a perfect example of that. I wanted to see more scenes like this, and I think that this was a really strong moment, but I just wanted to see more of this, because yes, on one hand, Annie's mom getting kicked out, it really has nothing to do with her, but you can see that Annie is really feeling a lot of guilt because she doesn't like, what's really happened. She doesn't like all this negative controversy that's always following her. Whether it be justified controversy or not, the fact is that it is controversy, and there's not really much she can do to escape it. And I think that this is a pretty good scene. Again, I need more. I need more of this storyline. I feel like we just didn't really get enough of it here. But those are really all the individual storylines going on that I really did enjoy. I'll talk a little bit more about some of the stuff I didn't like as much in a little bit. Of course, this does all lead to this big action set piece between the boys versus the Deep and Black Noir, and this was just such an amazing sequence. I mean, we haven't had, admittedly, a lot of big action sequences this season. It's mainly been very character-driven. The Boys has always been character-driven, but this season, more so than ever, has been very character-driven, and so they really haven't focused as much on the action, and I feel like this scene really did make up for that, because what I love about this scene is that there's so much history between all these characters. For Annie and the Deep, she's taking down her abuser. I mean, this is the guy who got her to, who made her go through all of this pain, all this fight that she's had within her. The Deep it always goes back to him. It always goes back to what he ended up doing to her. He's the one that really got her to this point. He's the reason that she's kind of where she is right now. And so I love the moment where she's just wailing on him, and you realize just how powerful Annie really is when she's fully accessing, her powers. We can see throughout the season she's kind of been struggling with that, and to see her just destroy him, I thought was just such an amazing moment. It was so satisfying to watch. I love the way that was done. And then Black Noir and Butcher, I mean, what I love about this is that this is not the Black Noir that Butcher has fought before. This is a Black Noir that is significantly weaker, and as a result, you can see Butcher is, he has a much steadier hand against him. It doesn't feel nearly as unfair as it would have if this was the regular Black Noir, who would have destroyed Butcher in a second. I've heard some people complain that nobody died in this sequence, but ultimately, I mean, I think that it makes up for the fact that we get this great moment with A-Train and MM coming in to save the day, and A-Train finally is that hero. He finally is being that savior that he's always wanted to be, and also ends up confessing to the Deep and Black Noir that he was the leak, and, then decides that he's going to run away. It seems like Ashley's going to follow suit. They had this plan to run away to Florence, but it doesn't seem like she's ready to do it. And do I think this is the last we're going to see of A-Train? No. I think that definitely we're going to see him again. I think that he's going to play a very crucial role in the next season, But this is the last we see of him in this season, and I think that this was just a really satisfying moment, such a great character arc for him this entire season. I love the way they have dived into him wanting to become this hero, and not really caring about the recognition, but caring more about actually being one, actually showcasing that he is that one, and being able to finally do something worthwhile with his life and not feel like he is just, this performative sort of, washed up phony. He finally does feel like he has done what he's always wanted to do, and now he can rest. And I just thought that this was such an amazing moment. Brandon T. Jackson has been killing it this season, but this episode, really just cemented A-Train as one of the most satisfying arcs throughout this entire show. And I really didn't think I was going to say that, because if you remember, like I've said it before, I think A-Train's a character they sometimes just don't really know what to do with. But this season, I think they really got a handle on his character, and it made for some of the best moments of this entire season. So then also with Annie, of course, this does lead to where this episode does end up going, where earlier there's this moment where Huey and Annie are accosted by this woman. We don't really know what's going on, but it turns out this woman is a shapeshifter, and the second that this happened, you knew it was going to come somewhere into the forefront, and this ties into the Seven, where basically we know that they're going to commit this assassination attempt on Singer. They're going to try to assassinate Singer, and you realize by the end of this episode exactly how they are planning to do that, where there's this moment where it seems like Annie is present. There's this moment between her and Huey. It seems like they're going to have this really intimate moment. But you realize that moments before, when Annie and Butcher and MM were all in this bar, Annie was attacked by this woman who wanted a photo. Shapeshifter impersonated as this fan, ended up kidnapping Annie, and now is, basically masking herself as Annie, and Annie is going to now be the one that they are going to try to commit this act on Singer. And just what an amazing way to end this episode, and what an amazing way to set up the finale and really just push Annie that much further as a character. She's been such a prominent role this season, with her constantly struggling with how she's able to, fully rid of that darker type persona, and this could completely threaten all of that. She wants to be seen as this hero. She wants to be seen as a good person, but this can absolutely destroy her entire reputation, but also could just make things so much more worse and paint the boys in this monstrous lights. Again, just such an amazing way to wrap things up. It gets you really excited for the next episode, but it also, again, just really falls in line with what we've been trying to do with Annie all season long, and I think they did a really good job with that here. So all those things I think do work really well. I think the only other thing to really talk about with the Seven that I really did enjoy is everything they do with Sage in this episode, where basically Sage is really getting overthrown by Firecracker. She's kind of the one in the driver's seat now. She's the one making a lot of the decisions. There's this meeting of sorts that Sage wanted to happen, and Firecracker has moved it up. You can see that Sage is not being as respected when and it gets to a point where when Homelander finds out that Sage is the one responsible, that Sage knew about the leak, he ends up ousting her from the Seven. Now, a lot of people are wondering why he didn't just kill her right then and there, but I think it's because Homelander knows that there is a purpose for Sage. He's not just going to kill her because he does have some sort of purpose for her. He does have some level of respect for her, and I think you do kind of see that here. But then the other big moment with Sage is with the Deep in this episode. Again, you're seeing her try to push the Deep further towards, further away from the Seven, and there's this moment between him and Ambrosius where they've talked about running away together, and Ambrosius is, finds out that he has had these sexual relations with Sage, and the Deep and Ambrosius get into this huge fight that culminates in the Deep destroying Ambrosius' tank, and Ambrosius dies right then and there. And again, another arc that is kind of hard to take seriously. I feel like the Deep has always been like a really just silly character in terms of like in terms of like what they've done with him. But I think if we're talking about a character who has shifted in a dramatic way, I do think the Deep is a very good example of that. He's gone rogue in the sense where now the thing that was start off the season as like, you know, the one person that truly understood him, that he had this unconditional love for, now even he's fully turned against, and it's going to be really interesting to see where the Deep does go from there. You know, the way that Sage has completely just turned him against everybody, I think that was just such a great moment, and I really like the way all of that played out. So I thought they did some really good stuff there. And then with Ashley, like I said, there's this moment where Ashley is kind of mourning Coleman's death, and it seems like she's finally being led to leave the Seven once and for all, leave Vought, and A-Train comes up to her, and, you know, it seems like it's going to happen, and she ultimately decides not to do it, and I thought all of that was just really great, the way all of that ended up playing out. There's also this great moment where, you know, basically Homelander, all season long, he's been trying to find the leak. This has been something that he's been very adamant about, but here we really see him at, like, his most desperate to do so. He is convinced at this point that it is Webweaver, and he ends up literally, like, cutting Webweaver in half, which was just insane, the way that all went down, the way he just completely demolished him, like, piece by piece. I think was just such a violent sequence, but again, it really shows Homelander being pushed to his breaking point. We've been seeing that all season, and this is a perfect example of that. And then eventually leading to him finding out about A-Train's betrayal. I definitely saw it, you know, when he was emotional about it, I definitely saw it as genuine. I feel like he felt like A-Train was somebody that was going to be this loyal soldier. He was never going to turn on him. He was always going to be somebody in his corner. He was always going to have his back, and realizing that that's not the case, I think this is really the first moment that it has generally affected Homelander, and I thought it was a really great moment. Yes, it was definitely kind of funny to see Homelander feel genuine sadness about it, but at the same time, I feel like this was a really good moment for Homelander, because it really did show that, yeah, I think he definitely did see this as, like, one of the people that was just never going to turn on him, and I think it was just the utter shock of it all. You can see that it really did kind of get to him there, and I thought that was a really good moment. But then there's the stuff that I wasn't as crazy about in this episode, and one of those things is Frenchie, who is a character that I just think at this point, his arc has been so back and forth for me all season. I think I've really come to the conclusion that I would have liked this arc a lot more if they had just taken their time with it, because it just feels like they, at this point, are doing things with Frenchie because they have to, because they need to include him in the show, and it doesn't really matter if it's done in a satisfying way. Basically, he has been released from jail, basically, like, forcibly by Butcher, and immediately I didn't really like this, because Frenchie went to jail because he himself felt like he needed to. He felt so guilty over what he did to Colin and his family that he felt that this was his only way to get over that and punish himself. And I really wanted to see more of him, you know, in this holding cell, him kind of, you know, him kind of reconciling with his, you know, choices and other things that he's done in his life. I wanted to see more of that. And I would have preferred a lot more if we would have actually seen this, you know, prison break happen. We would have gotten to see more scenes of him in jail. But no, he's right back in there, and now he's trying to, in a less violent way, get Samir to make this virus. And, you know, that's basically his main role here. But we also get some moments between him and Kimiko, who, look, I've enjoyed these two throughout the show. I really like the budding romance that has grown between them, but here it just feels like it's coming out of left field. It really does, because the entire season we've been setting up as these two don't really want to talk to each other about what they've been going through, and they do. That part makes sense, that they finally do confess to each other about what's going on and what they've really been through, and get each other to understand the predicaments that they're in and why they have been, you know, grappling with so much this season, why they haven't been able to talk it out. All of that is really good. I don't have a problem with that. What I do have a problem with is them deciding that, instead of them just deciding that they're just kind of friends for now, and that, you know, Frenchie was with Colin and he was happy with him, now we're just reverting back to the two of them being romantically involved with each other, and I just don't feel like this was a satisfying way to go about this. I feel like if you were going to have Frenchie and Kimiko be together, why even introduce Colin at that point? Colin just feels so unnecessary as a character. I feel like if they were going to have him, one, we needed to really see these two like grow into that relationship, because it just felt like it came out of nowhere, and it felt like they didn't do a great job of getting us to fully buy into their relationship. But then also with Frenchie and Kimiko, they spent an entire season of them kind of confessing their feelings to each other and seeming like it was going to go somewhere, and then it just didn't, and now we're just kind of back here, and it just isn't very satisfying to me. It's a storyline that I've enjoyed in other seasons, but this time around it's just felt very sort of muddled, and it just doesn't really feel like they have laid out the groundwork for these characters to get to this place. Obviously, like I said, the part of them talking about their past, I think that works really well. But again, it's the more sort of romantic feelings they have for each other. I feel like that's been put on the back burner all season long, that them now going back to it just didn't really work. If you're going to do that, go back to it in season 5. Like, you can hint at the fact that these two still like each other and not necessarily have them take that leap in this episode. I think that would have been a lot more satisfying, because Frenchie's just not in the right headspace for something like that. But instead, they're reverting right back to it, and it just didn't really feel that narrative satisfying. I did like that we got this moment of finding out like why Kimiko can't speak, and it's basically because of the fact that she has been conditioned not to. She has been told by Shining Light that basically she has to be this ghost, and in order for her to do so, she needs to kind of just become persona, she kind of just needs to become disappear, and she needs to shed all her emotions, and this was kind of her way of doing that. That was a really great scene, very well performed by Karen Fukuhara, and I liked the way that was done. But again, the way they handled this whole storyline just didn't really quite work for me, and I wish that, again, it would have been a bit more narratively satisfying. So I really like both of these characters, but I just feel like this season, aside from some really great moments with Frenchie, I just don't think they have utilized them in the way that we really have wanted them to, and it just feels like two characters that the show just hasn't really known what to do with this season. And then the other plotline that I'm kind of 50-50 with, like, I like the idea of it, but I don't really know if it really works, is Ryan. Another character this season that I just feel like the show is so back and forth with. And this episode really does confirm that to me, because it really did seem like after episode 5, they were making the choice that, okay, he is now going to start to give into Homelander's darker side. He's going to start to embrace that more. He has now, been with Homelander for a while, and he's starting to kind of recognize some of his darker urges. What he did in episode 5, I really like that. You get to this episode, and now it feels like, no, now we're back to Orion that doesn't want anything to do with Vought, doesn't like all the weird, corrupt, all the weird shit that they're doing, I think that this storyline is one that really could have worked. I like the idea that Ryan is doing this, Christmas commercial, and he is, part of this video that's supposed to be this, like, really positive video for families and things like that, but it contains lyrics and, morals that he just is so against. Basically, he's being told to do this video that is all about that if your parents do anything that seems suspicious, you are to report them. Even if it's your own family, you need to call it out. And Ryan really is not about that, because he's had positive family interactions before. He has had, he has had good conversations with Butcher. That, the time that they spent together in episode 3, it's really stuck with him, and you can see that he just can't really get behind the messaging of this song, and so he does decide to, call it out live on air and talk about all the positive things about your family and how you should support your family, and that they, and all these, things that he's taken away from not just with Butcher, but also from Becca and the things that she said to him. And I think all of this is really good. It makes sense for Ryan as a character. It just doesn't really make sense for him this season. I don't know how we go from a Ryan who is, willing to, who is laughing at someone's misery. Now, granted, the person whose misery he was laughing at was sexually harassing a girl, and it makes sense why he was doing that, but him starting to, embrace his more violent urges, and now we go to a Ryan who is totally against the idea of this Christmas song. Again, it just doesn't really flow, and I feel like his arc, it just feels a bit messy this season. And again, I've liked what they've done with him, but it just feels like you need to either have him not want anything to do with Vought, or feel like he's ready to embrace his role. I feel like they needed to figure out which they wanted to do, and they're trying to do both here, and it just doesn't really end up working. Because on one hand, you have a Ryan who still has his morals, still has had two parents that care about him, and that has stuck with him, and they provided, some really great insight and all these morals that he cares a lot about. And he goes to Vought and he finds out all this stuff that Homelander is doing that he doesn't agree with at all, and he's really uncomfortable with it. He wants to get away. That makes sense. But then you have a Ryan who is spending time with Homelander, and he's starting to listen to him more. He's starting to understand him more. He's willing to go along with some of his dad's darker urges. And you can see where the issue is. They just don't feel like they fit together. And I feel like this episode is the most egregious example of that yet. So while I enjoyed what they did with Ryan in this episode, I just don't feel like it really fits with the storyline that we've been trying to tell. And to be honest with you, I'm just kind of confused with what they've been doing with his character up to this point. Now, that I will say they do rectify quite a bit of that in the next episode, which I'll talk about, but for right now at least, I just had a really hard time figuring out, what do they really want me to take away from this storyline? Where has this really been going? Where are the breadcrumbs that feel like we've been getting to this point? Again, it just didn't really feel all that satisfying to me, so that was another storyline that I just didn't really feel was as satisfying as it could have been. Now, despite the fact that I wasn't a big fan of Ryan's arc, I did really love the way things end here with him, basically denouncing all the stuff that Vought is trying to get him to promote, all these things they want him to say, and this gets Butcher to go right to Kessler and say, that's it, that's the moment. It gets him to finally have this realization where it's like, this is why I can't lean into those, fully monstrous urges. This is why I can't give you the keys right now, because I still have faith in Ryan. I still feel like there is good in him. I still feel like he can be the one to turn everything around. And that, I thought, was just such a fantastic moment and a really great scene for Butcher. So it did make up for how this plotline ended up working. I enjoyed the idea of it. Again, I just feel like Ryan as a character has just been kind of confusing to me as to how they really want to portray him. But Butcher's arc and his constant hope and belief in Ryan, that works out really well. That's a storyline I've really latched onto this season, and so that moment really ended up working for me. It's really just how they've portrayed Ryan all season. Again, it just ended up falling a little bit flatter than I think that I was hoping for. But other than that, I think this was a really strong episode, did a really good job of kind of laying out the groundwork for what this last episode of the season is really going to be, paying off some really great character arcs. A-Train especially, I love all the work they did with him in this episode, and him and MM's conversation, generally, I think one of my favorite scenes in the entire show. Had a great action sequence between Annie, Butcher, The Deep, and Black Noir. I love that whole confrontation, the way that all ended up going down, and now perfectly setting up this idea of how, to really get a sense of the grander plan of things when it comes to the seven, and knowing that we have this final season coming up, how do we really set things in motion for what could be this really exciting finale? Why? Well, let's just have Annie be impersonated by this shapeshifter who is about to commit a really terrible act on Singer and just completely ruin all the good work the boys have been doing up to this point. I feel like this episode did a really great job of laying all that out and diving deeper into some of these characters. There are some arcs that I just don't feel as satisfied with. Ryan and Frenchie's in particular, just not really working for me at this point. Feels like they don't know what to do with either of these characters. Ryan, I think they know what to do with. I just don't think they're doing it correctly. And then Frenchie legitimately seems like they don't know what to do with that character, and I think this episode just really ended up confirming that. But either way, I still really enjoyed this episode a lot. I think this episode represents a lot of what has worked really well about this season. There are some things I'm a little bit worried about, for sure, and I think that maybe they could have done a better job at kind of fleshing out, but I think the things they did well, they really did do well here. So I'm going to give this episode of The Boys, Season 4, Episode 7, The Insider, an A-. Alright, so now it's the moment you've all been waiting for. I'm going to talk about the finale of Season 4, and holy shit, I mean, where do we even begin? Look, while I enjoyed, every episode of this season, I mean, I think it's pretty safe to say the finale is, far and away the best episode of this entire season. It really just feels like everything we've been leading up to, and I think they just did a really great job in getting us to this point. I do have some issues here and there, but, let me just get into it right now. I'm going to go plot by plot here, but there really is a lot to talk about. This is a very I would say top-heavy finale. The things that are going to be remembered are the things that happen in, the last, 15 to 20 minutes of this episode, but I think there's a lot of great stuff leading up to that, and I think they overall just did a really good job at both giving us a really satisfying finale, but also just perfectly setting things up for what's sure to be just such a epic final season. But let's just get into it. So I think the first thing I really want to talk about is everything they did with this Annie shapeshifter storyline. I thought was incredibly well done. Right from the get-go here, Huey can tell that something is just kind of off. The way that Annie is acting, it doesn't really align with how she usually is. Their sex life has suddenly improved in a huge way, and while you can tell he's enjoying it, he's a little doubtful of what's really going on there. And I will just say, Erin Moriarty has generally never been better in this role. I have always been a fan of her as Annie. I feel like The Boys is one of those shows where it's just so well acted. There are some actors that kind of get overlooked, and I feel like Erin Moriarty is one of them. I've heard people say that, she's more one note than some of the other actors, and I feel like this episode proves that is very much not the case, because one, I mean, we get to see a whole different side of this character that we really haven't seen before, specifically the scene where we see the real Annie being held hostage and Shapeshifter is taunting her and, saying all this stuff to, try to provoke her. I mean, just phenomenal stuff overall. Two, it just really showcased, the range that Moriarty has as an actress in a way that I think the rest of the show just simply hasn't. It's because Annie is just simply one of the good people on this show. So she doesn't really have a lot of, she's never really had this chance to fully unleash and really showcase this more menacing side of her. But I mean, I thought that she just absolutely blew me away in this episode, and I was so impressed by her acting throughout this entire thing. But basically, the whole scheme goes down to assassinate Singer, but Huey's able to recognize that something is off, and before the assassination happens, the real Annie comes in, and she ends up choking Shapeshifter, and just a really great moment overall, the way that whole thing went down. Yes, obviously, I think that there was a possibility that this wasn't going to work out and that Singer, was going to die. But ultimately, Annie is able to come in and save the day. And despite the fact that I do think her arc has been kind of rushed overall, I think they really did make up for that in this episode. The moment where now she is now fully in control, she has been able to put aside her own sort of demons and really do something heroic, and by the end of this episode is able to fly on her own without any error whatsoever. I think was just such a satisfying moment, and I really liked what they end up doing with her in this episode. But going back to Annie real quick, eventually, she does become aware of Huey and the fact that him and Shapeshifter apparently had sex like 20 times. And look, the moment where I've heard there's a lot of controversy about this, like, why is she mad at Huey? I feel like you kind of have to put it into her perspective, where it's like, she was gone, he wasn't able to recognize it until much later, and I like the fact they're able to have this conversation, and eventually he admits that he was in the wrong for this, and I think it was a really good moment for them, so I don't really have too many complaints with how they handled this. Obviously, sucks for Huey, like, he can't catch a break at all. He goes from losing his father to being sexually assaulted to essentially being sexually assaulted again. But I do think the way they handled this with Annie and Huey was really good, and I like the way that this conversation ended up going down. Even going as far as to have Shapeshifter propose to Huey, and, him going through with giving her the ring that, his mom gave him. Again, I mean, just really, they did a great job of getting us to show the full extent of Shapeshifter and what they are willing to do to really just infiltrate everybody's lives, and I thought that they did a really good job with that overall. But of course, the really big stuff in this episode really is what ends up going down with Butcher, who... holy shit. I mean, I think he has probably had the most consistent arc out of everybody this season. I really love what they've been trying to do with him, showing that he, has tried to, he's always seen the good in Ryan, and he's going to continue to try to see the good in Ryan, and he is still hopeful that Ryan is going to turn things around, and we find out that after the last episode, him and Homelander had a bit of a scuffle. He has now been sent to the hospital where Butcher is potentially about to die. I forgot to mention he collapsed at the end of the last episode, and he's not really sure if he's going to make it. There's some really heartfelt moments, like when he's talking to Huey, and he talks about his brother and how much he meant to him, and I think everything they do with Butcher, leading up to this point was so satisfying, and what we end up getting in this episode was so incredibly devastating, because I think the show has done a really good job this season of showing this balance of Butcher. The more careless and selfish side of him balanced with the side that is generally trying to be a good person and trying to turn his life around, and how those are constantly at odds with each other. But they also have done this great job of showing the love he has for Ryan, and how that is kind of the thing that holds him back from fully leaning into his darker urges, and well, that gets wrecked in this episode, to say the least. Any sort of semblance of hope for Butcher is kind of gone after this episode, because basically Ryan comes in there, and Mallory is also there as well, and Mallory is someone who has always tried to handle things in the most careful way that she can, but she makes a grave error in this episode. Quite literally makes a very grave error in this one, where she, after so much time of us wondering, when is Ryan going to find out the truth about his father? That Homelander is not a good person, and that Homelander, raped Becca, and, how his upbringing was, and all this other stuff, and it all comes crashing down in this episode, where Mallory reveals to Ryan the truth about, his origins, but also even talks about the flight, and, how that all went down, and obviously, Ryan is in shock about this, and I think if Mallory had just left it here, the way things end up going down, it goes much differently, because Ryan kind of wants to take a second to see if he's really ready to how he needs to process all this information, and it seemed like things were heading in a direction where he probably was going to take this offer. He just had this really great moment with Butcher where he talks about how much his mom loved him and how much he cares about him, and it really did seem like things are headed in a positive direction. But then Mallory doesn't want Ryan to think. She basically gives him a choice of, you have to accept this offer right now, or we're just going to lock you up in the woods and you're going to be there forever. And Ryan obviously is enraged about this, feels like this entire thing was just a front to try to detain him and treat him like an animal, and he's not here for that at all. He shoves Mallory, and I think the second he shoved her, we knew that what was going to happen. The same thing that happened to the stunt guy in episode 2, where he accidentally killed him. He does the same thing to Mallory here, and this is the moment. This is the moment right here where Butcher, throughout this entire season, he has had this reluctance as to whether or not he was going to, fully lean into those darker urges. And the second that Ryan kills Mallory, he realizes, oh fuck, there really is no hope. This is exactly the thing that Kessler has been warning me about, and gives the keys over to him. And we knew that some shit was going to go down the second that happened, but what an incredible moment this really was. It's a lot to take in, and I've taken criticisms with how they handled Ryan's arc up to this point, but I do think they did a lot of great work here to make sense of it all. I think Ryan is someone who was just very conflicted over how to feel about things, and when you're, being told all this information about your father, there's obviously a lot to take in. And I think that he probably was going to take this offer. I really do feel like that's the direction that things were heading in. But I think at this point, it was all sprung up on him way too quickly. He needed time to process it, and he just never was fully able to. So, well, yes, I do feel like they still kind of rushed us getting here. I wish that we spent a little bit more time seeing Ryan try to embrace being a soup and, doing some more reckless things. I really do love the note things ended on here, and I generally don't know where Ryan is headed at this point. Is he going to go after Homelander and, do what Mallory wanted, or is he going to just go rogue on his own and completely forge his own path? I really don't know what's going to happen, but I think we're heading into some really interesting potential for Ryan as a character that I really hope they end up exploring, because I felt like there was so much more they could have done with him this season, and I wish that we would have seen a bit more of him kind of trying to figure out his role within the Seven and, what he was really going to do for Vought and things like that, but also kind of focus on him finding himself, and it seems like they're going to focus more on that in season 5. And, with Mallory no longer there to kind of try to, keep things together, there's honestly no telling where things are going to go with him. But this was just such a fantastic moment. It was a very shocking moment. I certainly did not expect Mallory to die in the way that she did there. I mean, the second she told Ryan what was going to happen, I was like, yeah, she's pretty much a goner at that point. But just, they've done a really great job, I think, in developing the Butcher and Ryan storyline this season, throughout the entire show, but especially this season. I think they've done a really good job with that, and so this moment was so incredibly shocking, but also so devastating for what it meant for Butcher and his failure to, now he no longer can defend Ryan. He's always been looking for that reason to, and now he no longer can, and you can see the immediate effect that this has on him as a result. But of course, the major thing to talk about within this episode is everything that goes down with Newman, who I gotta say is a character that I have been very impressed by all season. I think they've done a very good job at taking her and really giving her a little bit more nuance, a little bit more complexity, fleshing her out in a way that gets us to both sympathize with her, but also kind of detest a lot of things that she's done. And I think this episode, really did feel like she's been at her breaking point all season, and this is the moment where she finally breaks. She has this she ends up on Truth Bomb, and, she thinks that she's going to be there for this regular interview with Homelander, but then he wants her to drop a Truth Bomb, and when she kind of acts like all naive about it, he just spills in front of everybody that she is a soup, and she has these powers, and she's been hiding it from the world, and you can just see in this moment that Newman is done with him. There is no more even trying to forge some sort of alliance with him, and I loved this moment because the entire season she's been trying to be sort of like a lackey to him of sorts, someone who is following his orders. He's had all this control over her, and to see her finally just like tell him to fuck off and not want anything to do with that, I mean, it was just such a satisfying moment for Newman. But I think the best moment of them all comes after this, when he later calls her and, she threatens to like, sue him and things like that, but he calls her and basically says that, like, you don't have a choice here, threatening her daughter, saying he's going to send a piece of her every single year until she complies. I mean, again, I think Newman just really finally sees just the pure evilness of Homelander and just how relentlessly is there truly is nothing he won't do, and I think she really recognized it in this moment. And the first thing she wants to do is try to make amends with Huey and try to do what she can to make things right. And I love the way this plays out because he doesn't believe her at first. When they're having this conversation, he thinks there's going to be some kind of catch, but she assures him that that's not going to be the case. And they do a great job of giving us this hope that things are finally going to work out, that, oh my god, Newman has finally stood up to Homelander. She's veering away from that. She's now going to work alongside the boys and try to destroy Vought from the inside out. She's going to go after Homelander. It's all going to work out. And, after a season of Huey trying to do what he can to convince her to maybe turn things back around and recognize, the good that she has in her, she's finally embracing it. And obviously the boys are like very reluctant about this. They really don't know if they want to bring Newman in. And again, I love the way that they showcase all this hope. Huey gives this great speech where he talks about how, they're fighting monsters. They need to start acting like humans, and they need to start recognizing that is going to be the weakness here. Again, just such a triumphant moment, and it really does seem like things are going to work out. Newman's on our side. We can make this work. MM even talks about like what's going to happen if she does do something shady and they have to bring her down. They know how to do that. They have all this leverage against her that they could use at any point that they want. So again, it really did seem like things were set in motion for something to actually really work out and maybe finally get them to have some sort of success. They've had all these failures. Maybe finally things are going to start to turn around. And then Butcher comes into the room and the whole thing is pretty much thrown off at that point. And I didn't really know what was going to happen here because if you remember in the beginning of the season, he wanted to strike a deal with Newman. They were going to work on this virus together. She was the one that, had it in her possession, and it seemed like he was going to try to forge some type of bond with her. But Butcher, at this point, I think, the best way to think about it is that Butcher now sees every single soup in the way that he once did. He doesn't see any good within them. He has completely shed his humanity at this point, and he is not willing to negotiate with anybody. And just right then and there, he ends up, and then right then and there, just in front of everyone, ends up ripping Newman in half, and holy shit, this moment was insane, the way that all ended up going down. And I think, again, it really did end up being this, like, really inevitable moment, but not one that I expected to see. Because, to be honest with you, if you had to ask me who was going to die in this episode, Newman was not on the top of that list. I thought she was honestly going to be fine. I thought she was going to die, but I thought it was going to be season 5, maybe early in the season. I did not think it was going to be in the finale, and just what an incredible moment this really was, because again, you can see that Butcher has been trying to do right, and here is where he basically just throws all that away, recognizing that in his mind it's not really going to amount to much of anything, and ends up taking the virus in his own hands. And I mean, this is really just everything coming full circle. There's been this conflict between him and the boys all season where they have not enjoyed his reckless activities. They don't like the fact that he goes rogue and actively ends up, in many reasons ruining the mission for them. They just can't trust him anymore. And the one time it seems like they are finally ready to welcome him back in, that's when things end up going to shit. And that's when any bit of hope that they had is just destroyed in an instant. And just what an insane moment this really was. But again, it feels like this full circle moment for Butcher. He has been trying to, go down this path and, show that he is this good person. But after everything that's happened with Brian, his failure to, showcase the goodness in him, his failure to, properly parent him and things like that, now you can see all that guilt. He, in this state where, he knows he's going to die, he's just willing to forego all of that and fully just do things on his own. He has now let Kessler fully in the driver's seat, and I mean, just so incredibly devastating to watch. Just knowing what he was trying to do and what he was trying to avoid, now there really is no avoiding it, and Butcher is now a full-on adversary for the boys. And again, I think this is something that we all should have seen coming. I heard people hinted it a lot. I just didn't know if the show was going to go in that direction, but they very much are, and it's going to be that much more complicated, especially now knowing that he has this compound V and things like that, and he can do whatever he wants with this virus now. I mean, I have no idea what is going to happen, but I can only imagine how much more Butcher is going to overcomplicate things for everyone else within the boys as a result. So again, really insane the way it's played out. And then on Newman's side of things, no, this was not necessarily how I expected her to die. Do I think this was a satisfying death? No, but I think that's the point. I heard many say that, Newman died too early, we should have seen her stick it out to the end, but I feel like that's the idea here, is that they were going to give Newman a second chance. They were this close to aligning with her. The deal was going to go through. It was just too late, and it happened at a point where Butcher just had a unspeakable tragedy occur right in front of his eyes after all the damage that has happened, and him, trying to step back and let them do what they want. Now he is just no longer willing to do that, and you see him just fully give in. And I generally think that, the second there was a soup that was, in contact with the boys, they were going to get killed. It didn't matter if it was Newman. It didn't matter if it was A-Train. He was going to kill them regardless. And I feel like that makes this a much more satisfying moment. Because, yes, obviously there was a lot more potential for Newman. I really was hoping that we'd get to see her, at least for a couple episodes, work alongside the boys. And then maybe things end up going horribly wrong. But considering how this all ended up happening, and that I do think that we have been leading up to this with Butcher this entire time, I do think overall this was a really just incredible moment to witness, and again, really just ends up bringing things full circle in a way that I think we weren't expecting at all. And then if it's not already bad enough, right when we think that things have already hit rock bottom and they can't possibly get any worse, now it seems like the boys are going to split up. They're realizing that really their only solution here is just to go into hiding, because there's really no way that they're going to be able to avoid any of this, and it seems like it's going to work. Huey and Annie are going to go on their own. You have, you have Kamiko and Frenchie and them sort of, going out and doing their own thing. MM's going to go back to his wife and daughter and finally maybe be able to have a normal life. And then again, right when it seems like maybe this is gonna work out, in comes all these soups and end up detaining them. And I mean, I cannot think of a better way to get us hyped for the next season than this moment, realizing that the boys are now completely powerless. They really aren't able to do anything after after a whole season of trying to make progress and trying to find a way to take down Homelander. Unfortunately, now they are in this situation where it seems like no matter what they do, the soups are pretty much going to overpower them. Vought will always overpower them in that way, and I just thought that this was just such a incredible moment from, seeing MM and him fully ready to leave, and then him being attacked by a bunch of these soups from Herogasm, from seeing Annie and Huey, and it seems like things are going to work out, but then Huey gets taken away, and Annie finally flies into the air for, like, the first time in the entire show. I mean, what a crazy shot, and what a great shot, too, the way that was handled. And then Kimiko and Frenchie, probably the most devastating of them all, where it finally seems like the two of them have fully accepted their love for each other. They're ready to move forward with their relationship. And then Frenchie ends up Frenchie then ends up, they are accosted by Kate and Sam. Kate works her magic on Frenchie, and he ends up basically being mind-controlled to leave, where Kimiko then says, like, the first word she's ever heard in this show of no. Again, just such intense stuff. I was not expecting it to go down in the way that it did. Like, I knew things were going to end on a big cliffhanger because obviously it's the final season and there's going to be, they want to leave us out on a pretty big note, but I did not expect things to go this south for all these characters, and it really just shows how hopeless things have become at this point. It really just seems like there is no possible solution here, and things are going to have to get a lot worse before they get a lot better, and I feel like that is just the perfect way to kind of set things up for the final season overall. So that's really everything going on the boys side of things. Let's talk about the Seven, because there was some pretty crazy shit that went down when it comes to the Seven here. The big part of this obviously is the whole ploy to have this assassination go down. It doesn't really go in the way that they were hoping. But Homelander has some bigger plans. He doesn't just want to, take down Singer and make sure that soups are not limited in the way that Singer wanted them to. He also wants to pretty much destroy Vought from the... He also wants to make sure that he has full control of Vought in a way that he hasn't before. And the way he is going to do that is by basically eliminating any of the staff that is ever said anything bad about him. So he has Ashley concoct this entire list, and it seems, and basically they all just start mowing down members of Vought one by one. What a crazy sequence that was. But then in the midst of all of this, Ashley realizes, oh shit, they are absolutely going to come after me, and I gotta make sure that I am not one of the people that end up being killed. So she takes some Temp V, and I don't know what is going to happen here, but she has some crazy transformation where, like, her hair starts falling out and her something's, like, protruding through her brain, and we don't know what's going to happen to Ashley after that, but we know that now she is going to have some kind of superpower, and I'm just really excited to see how that ends up going down. I really love what they've been doing with Ashley this season, the way that we've kind of been seeing the more vulnerable side of her struggling to keep things together, and I kind of wonder if she's going to start to rethink what she did with A-Train. Is she going to maybe decide to go to Florence and meet up with him? Are the two of them going to team up? I mean, there's a lot of possibilities for Ashley now that she's a soup, and Homelander will not necessarily have as much power over her as he once did. I'm really excited to see where this is going to go, because this is really the first time Ashley's made a choice entirely for herself in the show to protect herself, and I'm really interested to see where this ends up going down from here. So what a shocking moment. Was not expecting things to go in that direction at all. And then, of course, we find out that now, even though the assassination has not gone down, Homelander is basically in control of the White House. The president that is going to be elected, he has his full support, and he is going to do what he can to basically control everything. Firecracker is now a part of Truth Bomb as well, so the Seven is very quickly just taking over the entire world, and I feel like this just makes the most sense. Like, if you're going to have this final season happen, you need to have Homelander at a high before he ends up coming down, and I feel like this is the way that you end up doing that, and ending things on the note that they did in the post-credit scene as well, really has me hyped to see where things are going to go, where basically he is led to this lab where it seems like they are going to once again unfreeze Soldier Boy, and who knows where that is going to go down. The last time these two interacted, it obviously was not very good, and the big question is, are they going to team up, or is he going to try to kill Soldier Boy? Now, they have talked a little bit about at Comic-Con how Soldier Boy is going to be more on Homelander's side, which makes sense because obviously things didn't work out for the boys, so I wouldn't expect him to go in that direction. But I feel like, bringing back Soldier Boy, it brings out another layer to Homelander that I think is very much needed, and I'm also just really excited to see what else they do with this character. Jensen Ackles was so good in season 3. There's so much more potential for him as a character, and I'm really excited to see how all of that goes down. So again, just a really great way to set things up for the final season here. So a lot of things just really worked out, I think, really well in this episode. I was really impressed by pretty much all the character moments. Even the Kimiko and Frenchie stuff in this episode, it still really worked out for me because they're moving forward with their relationship, and it seems like things are going to work out, and then they end up captured. I didn't even really have a problem with that. I still feel like their storyline was easily, the weakest of the season. They need to do a better job with that. The only thing that didn't really work for me in this episode, and I hate to say it because I've really loved this character the entire season, was Sage. And not so much Sage as a character, but her whole master plan in this episode, I've really tried to, think about if there's any, semblance of, logic here, if this is something that actually works out in the grand scheme of things. When you look back at the season, is this something that, I really can think okay, I can see why she would do that. And I watched this, I finished this season a month ago, and I've kind of just come to the conclusion that I just don't buy it. I really just don't buy it. And look, I'm hoping that what we end up hearing in this episode, that is not Sage's plan. She has this grander plan of sorts. But if that is the case, I'm really just not a fan of it, because you're telling me you go through this whole thing where you slowly turn the Seven against each other. You have Black Noir and the Deep competing for your affections. You have the Deep start to stand up to Homelander and others, and you have Ashley start to recognize her spot within the Seven. You have, or within Vought, you have A-Train. That's kind of how he started to realize things that he was doing. Even going as far as to Sage herself being detained because of the fact that she knew about the leak. You're telling me all of that was part of your plan and that's all what you wanted to do? Again, I don't really buy into that. I can't sit here and say that this makes total sense. This feels like the trajectory of where Sage's character was going. I guess for me, I was just really hoping that they were going to do something where we saw a bunch of moments throughout the season and then we reframe it through Sage's perspective and we see what she was trying to do in those moments. I would have much preferred that to what we get here. That just kind of felt like a cop-out to me. They didn't really know what they wanted to do with Sage and how this was all going to work out, so they kind of just had her hand wave it away as, well, this was all part of my plan and now we're going to move on to phase 2. So I'm really just hoping that what this is her bullshitting Homelander and she has some deeper plan of her own, because to me this entire season it's felt like she has some sort of disdain for Vought, and there's a bigger purpose for why she's doing what she's doing, and I really hope that is the case, because if this really is what they ended up doing with her, if this is really her grander plan, I'm not really into it at all, and it honestly is kind of a letdown. So in a finale that I thought mostly just really delivered, this was the one thing that I just wasn't really all that crazy about, and I'm not really a fan of how they decided to go about it. So holy shit, I mean, where to even begin with this episode? I mean, honestly, like, I think in a season that has been mostly build-up, this was absolutely the kind of finale that they needed to just really give us a sense of where are we really headed at this point? What is really going to be the domino that falls that just kind of sets everything into motion for the final season? I think this episode did such an amazing job at that. So much to really speculate on. I do feel like I know where things are headed when it comes to the boys, specifically because they said that the real beginning of Season 5 is in Gen V Season 2. I feel like it's pretty easy to come to the conclusion that where Kimiko and Annie and where they're all headed, it's probably going to be the same place that, like, Marie and Marie and all of them are in, and in Gen V. I feel like that's probably what's going to end up happening. Like, that's why they're in this room. That's why they didn't know what was going on. I feel like that was around the same time that this went down, and now all of them are, coming together, and, maybe this is where we start to see a team up of sorts. I think that's where things are really headed at this point, and if that's the case, I think that's a perfect way to connect both shows together, but also give both shows this much bigger sense of stakes. I think that could be really exciting if that's what they end up doing. When it comes to Butcher, though, as a character, I mean, I'm really interested to see where he ends up going at this point, because now he is just fully gone rogue. He is now fully given in to that more evil side, and there really is no saving him at this point. I think the only way for Butcher to be redeemed is if Ryan is able to turn himself around. If Ryan does do something heroic, I think it's going to get Butcher to come back to his senses, but I think that's the only way it's going to happen. I think for a while we're going to see this Butcher that is a lot more rougher around the edges, that, has no sense of morality, that has no sense of care for anyone around him but himself, and I'm just really interested to see how this all goes down, but also what is going to be the effect of Newman's death. How is this all going to play out, especially knowing that Edgar is still out there somewhere? And I was surprised we didn't see it in this episode, but I feel like there is no question about it whatsoever. Stan Edgar is going to play a really big role in Season 5, and we know that he likely is going to blame Homelander for this, and knowing that Edgar is like the one person that is able to kind of threaten Homelander in that way, I mean, I am so excited to see where things end up leading at this point and how that all ends up playing out. I think that's going to be such an interesting exchange. I think that's going to be such a interesting turn of events, how that all ends up going down. I'm just so excited to see what ends up happening there. But also, what ends up happening with Homelander now. I mean, he's basically gotten everything he's wanted. He's now taken over the entire White House, and even though, yes, you have this president, Homelander is basically controlling him, and now having Soldier Boy on his side as well. I mean, I think we're going to see like that much more meaner and that much more threatening side of the Seven than we really have up to this point. Having, Firecracker and Black Noir and the D people who are just fiercely loyal to him. I mean, I think we're going to see a Homelander that has been terrifying in a way that we have not seen before, and I can't wait to see how that all really does end up going down. When it comes to Annie as a character, I think now she is much more self-assured. She is much more willing to, be Starlight and embrace that side of herself. And I'm really excited to see where this ends up going. I think what we saw with Shapeshifter, what we saw in episode 7, she is definitely a lot more dangerous than we have gotten to see in the show. And I think in Annie that is much more in control of her powers, I think we're going to see her become that much more dangerous. And I'm really excited to see, hopefully seeing her like square off with Homelander and things like that, how that's all going to go down. I think it's going to be really exciting, what ends up happening there. And then when it comes to Sage, like I said, I just really hope that there is a grander plan here. I am hoping that what she said to Homelander is not actually her plan, and that she actually is much more self-interested than it seems, and that she herself has planted her foot in all the right directions. I mean, I'm having hope that that's what they're going to do, because right now it seems like they are using Sister Sage as a way to, like, explain things, and that's just not really what I was hoping. I was hoping that Sister Sage had a deeper purpose for all this, and I'm still not counting that out. Like, she still very well could, and we could introduce that in season 5. I just feel like the way they ended things here, it just wasn't the most satisfying when it came to her character, so I'm interested to see how that's all gonna go down. When it comes to Kimiko and Frenchie, I honestly don't know where they're headed with them at all. Like, they are the two characters that generally I don't know what they're doing with them. I haven't known what they're doing with them throughout most of the season, and now I just don't really know. Now that they've confessed their love to each other, how is that all gonna go down? And then when we talk about Ryan, I'm really interested to see where that ends up going as well. Now that he has basically gone out on his own, I think it really is anyone's guess what ends up happening there. Is there any chance he goes back to Vought and maybe tries to write things with Homelander, or is he going to, think back at what was said to him and now he's going to try to actually take him down? I don't know how that's all going to go, but I think that has a lot of potential as well, and I'm excited to see how that all plays out. I'm just really excited to see how season 5 turns out. I think, like I said, if you want a finale that just really set things in motion and get you really excited, but also just show that also just really ups the stakes and has all these shocking and devastating moments. I mean, I think this episode is just such a perfect encapsulation of all of that. Yes, this season was definitely a slower burn, but I think this finale really did help pay things off, really did have some very satisfying moments, but a lot of really shocking moments that I think really just kind of get you that much more pumped up for the final season than you really were. So overall, I was very impressed by this finale, and I am going to give season 4 episode 8 season 4 finale. We can't call Assassination Row anymore because, well, you know why, in A. So overall, now that I've talked about all 3 episodes, I just want to give my general thoughts on this season as a whole and what I really did think about it, because I will say, when the season started off, I thought, okay, this is going to be the one. This is the one that, we have all these interesting storylines going on. We're diving deeper into everyone's past. It's all coming back to haunt them. They're trying to do what they can to take down Vaughn and take down Homelander, but all these things are getting in the way. And the way things started off this season, I generally thought this was going to turn out to be the best season of the show. And then the more things did go, and at first it very much did seem that way. I think the first 4 to 5 episodes in particular were fantastic. I thought they just did a really great job of, just giving us so many interesting storylines for these characters, whether it came to Homelander, that amazing episode we got with him, and him going back to that lab and destroying everyone from the inside out and, getting his revenge in that way. I thought that was just such a great plot line. What they were doing with Annie this season, her trying to, shed her Starlight persona and get people to start to take her more seriously, and how that gets overcomplicated with Firecracker. I thought that was such an interesting dynamic. Sage, I thought, was such an interesting character. She brought a really fun sort of edge to this show, the way that she was kind of controlling things. I really liked the way that went down. I liked a lot of what they did with Huey this season, and him having all this parental drama where, his dad is in the hospital and his mom's now come back after all these years, and him trying to figure out what he really wanted to do about that, what they were doing with Butcher. I mean, there were a lot of interesting storylines for this season. I think ultimately the conclusion I came to, though, is that maybe it was just a little bit too much, and I think they maybe bit off a little bit more than they could chew this season, and as a result, I really do think, unfortunately, I walk away saying this is probably the weakest season of the show so far. I still think it's like a damn good season of television. I just think personally, this was a season that needed to be a lot more than 8 episodes for things to be more satisfying than they were. For example, I talked about Frenchie's storyline, but that is easily the perfect example of a storyline that just needed a lot more time devoted to it. I never really cared about Colin all that much because I didn't really feel like I knew him as a character. He really was just Frenchie's boyfriend who he had this, darker history with, and we found out more throughout the season, but it never really felt like that was at the forefront. When Colin ended up leaving, I didn't think he'd be leaving for good. I thought eventually we'd see him again, and so that wasn't really an issue for me, but we literally never saw him again, and who knows if that's ever gonna get brought up. I really wanted to see Frenchie kind of like atone for, what he did, and kind of see him kind of grapple with that. I wanted to see more, I wanted to see more, of a focus on that storyline. I know there's a lot of people that didn't like that storyline, but I think it really is because of just how overly rushed it was, and I think if they would have taken a bit more time to dive deeper into it, I think it honestly would have been really good for his character. Same goes with Kimiko, another storyline that I just need a lot more time with. Huey is a character that I liked a lot this season, but I feel like his storyline, again, they needed a lot more time with it. Daphne ends up being kind of not insignificant, but she ends up feeling like an afterthought towards the end of this season, because when it seems like, Huey Sr. has now died, I thought maybe they were going to spend the rest of the season trying to get him and his mom to reconnect, and then she just kind of went off on her own, and I really do feel like they should have spent more time with Huey grieving the loss of his father and what this really meant to him, and him kind of grappling with what effect this has on him moving forward. I think there was way more they could have done with that, but again, because they only had 8 episodes, they weren't able to do that, and I think that storyline just felt really rushed to me. What other one I'm going to say? Ryan's storyline this season I thought was very rushed overall. They couldn't seem to figure out what they wanted to do with him. I think they finally figured it out towards the end, but throughout the whole season, it's like, okay, are we going to have him start to lean into his more darker sensibilities, or are we going to have him just be completely against Vought, want to, turn on his dad, work, spend more time with Butcher? What are we really trying to do with him? It just felt like they weren't able to get a handle on his storyline because, again, they just simply didn't have the time to do it. So that's another storyline I think they needed to do more with. Even Annie's storyline that I really liked, I thought was very underwritten. I still don't buy into the fact that all it took was for Firecracker to say this one thing that she did and everybody would just hate her. I feel like they needed to spend more time on that. That was a storyline that I was just a little bit not underwhelmed, because I do think they did some good work with her character, but I just need a little bit more from. So again, there's a bunch of storylines this season, all of which I really did like, but I just think needed a lot more time. The ones that worked, though, really did end up working well, specifically A-Train. I think his whole redemption arc this season was one of the highlights of the season for me. I love what they end up doing with him. I love the way we dive deeper into him wanting to be a hero and what that really meant for him. I thought all of that was just so well handled. Butcher's storyline this season was absolutely fantastic. I really don't have any issues with the way that ended up going down, other than, yes, the Kessler reveal was kind of obvious, and maybe they could have done a better job at either revealing earlier on that was the case, or planting more seeds of doubt so we weren't guessing it, constantly throughout the season. Maybe they could have, revealed, maybe they could have handled that a bit differently, but other than that, I was very impressed by the way they went about that, and especially the turn his character takes, I thought was really well handled. I also really liked MM's character this season. I thought they did some really good work with him, with him trying to still be that loving father and, care about his family, but also try to take on this role as a leader. I thought all of that was really well done. The way they dive deeper into the more political elements of the show, I thought made a lot of sense considering that we are gearing up to the final season. Homelander is, has this grander plan of sorts to take over the world. It only makes sense for us to focus more on that element. But again, that was another thing that I just think they need to dive a bit deeper into. Newman, I wanted to see more of that dynamic with her and Singer and how she was trying to just keep it all together. I wish they would have focused more on that. In regards to where the show goes from here, obviously The Boys is not coming back until I believe they said 2026. They want to focus on Gen V Season 2. I'm just really hopeful at what Eric Kripke and all of them have planned. I feel like that they are setting the stage for what could be a really epic final season. The way it ties into Gen V as well, I'm really excited to see how that all does go down. I think honestly, we're in good hands. I do. I think that yes, there were definitely some bumps in the road this season, and there were some things that maybe they could have done a little bit better with. Maybe a little bit less focus on gross out humor. I know that's a staple of The Boys, but I do think they were a little too reliant on it this season, and sometimes it did feel more like a distraction from what was going on than anything. There were some storylines that also I just need a bit more clarity with. I'll never understand why they didn't show that reconciliation between MM and Butcher when they made such a big deal out of it in the first couple episodes. That's one especially that was a big head scratcher for me and kind of showed that maybe we're doing a little too much this season. That was really the first sign of it. Black Noir as a character, I really enjoyed this season, but I felt like they should have done a little bit more with him, trying to embrace that role more, and trying to figure out more about, who Black Noir was and things like that. I think they could have done more with his character, but overall, I still was really satisfied with the season. I still really love the way things end up going down, and I'm really excited to see where things end up going from here on out. So, again, I think it really just comes down to the idea that they just needed more time. They needed to have at least, I think, 13 episodes this season. That probably would have been enough with the amount of plot lines that they were trying to do, the amount of storylines they were trying to dive into here, all the characters that we were focusing on. I just think it was a little bit too much, and by the end, even though I was very satisfied with the majority of these storylines, it doesn't change the fact that it does come off as a little bit too overstuffed, and I think if they would have, again, taken a bit more time, I think this season would have been even better. But as it stands, I think this is still a really strong season. This is still easily one of the best shows on television. Some of the best moments within the entire show are in this season, and I think the way that things end off, I could not be any more pumped to see how season 5 ends up going. I have a lot of faith in them that they really are going to deliver the goods, and they're going to do something that really ends up working, that really ends up giving us that satisfying payoff that we all know this show is capable of doing. Again, I just think they need to really just kind of, for season 5, pick the storylines that they think are going to be the most worthwhile and don't try to do too much, because I think in this season, because they tried to do too much, it just started to feel a little bit underwhelming in quite a few storylines, and there were some that I think either could have been cut in half, could have been dived into more, and I think it just would have made for a more satisfying season of television. But as it stands, I still really did love this season a lot. I do think this is the weakest season of the show, but overall still did really love it. I think it's a hair below season 3. I think season 3, even though I had similar issues, the way things concluded with many of the storylines, I felt more satisfied than the way they did here. So because of that, with all those reasons and more, I am going to give The Boys season 4 overall an A-. But overall, guys, that's it. I have finally reviewed the last 3 episodes of The Boys Season 4. Like I said, I do apologize for the fact that this video was later than expected. I just wasn't able to do it. I just really have not had the time. I have so many videos on my plate, and it was just kind of like one of those things where it's like I had to keep pushing it off because I had other things to talk about, but I finally was able to discuss it, and I'm really happy about that. But either way, guys, let me know what you guys thought of these last 3 episodes overall. Left your thoughts. And what do you think of season 4 as a whole? Seemed to be kind of a polarizing one. I've seen some people really love this season. I've seen some people say that the show kind of jumped the shark. I definitely would not go that far. I do think it is the weakest season, but still a really damn good season overall. But other than that, guys, for this video, I hope you guys enjoyed it. We'll see you guys in my next video, and we'll see you guys for that. Okay, bye.
Don't worry about your laundry.